Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
You know, we love to bring you all sorts of topics here, but today we're going to talk about something pretty fundamental.
Yeah.
Just to how we connect with each other as people.
Absolutely.
And that is the power of culture and communication.
Yeah.
And you know, we don't always think about it and how important that is, but it's something I think we've all experienced at one point or another. You know, our world is so interconnected these days.
Yeah.
With technology, we can, you know, talk to people across continents in an instant, basically.
Right.
But yet we still have these kind of frustrating, sometimes experiences where we're just not clicking with someone.
Yeah.
Even when we're speaking the same language.
It happens all the time.
And more often than not, it's because there are these subtle but significant cultural differences at play.
Absolutely.
And those differences can create way bigger divides than just physical distance.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point and such a insightful way to start this deep dive. You know, we've made huge strides in shrinking the world geographically, like you said.
Right.
But I think bridging those gaps in understanding, bridging those different ways of seeing things, that's where the real work lies.
Yeah.
And that's why a deep dive into this is so essential.
Absolutely. And today, to help us do that, we're going to be drawing on the work of David J. Hesselgrave.
Okay.
Now, he is a professor emeritus of missions.
Okay.
And his 12 years spent living and working in Japan.
Wow.
Give him, I think, a really grounded perspective on cross-cultural interactions. You know, he really emphasizes the importance of understanding culture.
Right.
Not just as a bonus, but as something absolutely vital for truly effective communication.
Yeah.
Especially when we're trying to connect across fundamentally different worldviews.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember this isn't just about international communication.
Right.
Right? It comes up anytime you're interacting with someone from a different background, whether that's a different generation or even a different region of the same country.
Absolutely different part of the country.
Yeah, different, you know, socioeconomic status.
Yeah.
I mean, have you ever noticed how someone from a different background
Oh, yeah.
might interpret something you said in a completely unexpected way?
All the time.
Yeah, it's just fascinating.
And, you know, to your point about Hesselgrave's experience, I think it really underscores that while technology can bridge these vast distances,
Right.
that final frontier in communication is often navigating these nuances of cultural landscapes, even in these seemingly familiar settings.
Absolutely. Okay, so to really understand why these cultural differences matter so much,
Right.
we first need to define what culture even is.
Yeah. How do we define culture?
What do we mean by culture?
Yeah.
And Hesselgrave points us to the work of Louis Lisbettak,
Okay.
who offers a really helpful definition.
Okay.
He describes culture as a design for living, essentially a blueprint that guides how a society adapts to its environment.
Okay. I like that. A blueprint, a design for living.
Yeah, it's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Now, there are 3 aspects of this environment that he highlights.
Okay. What are those?
So first, you've got the physical environment.
Okay. So the physical environment.
So think about how a society provides for its basic needs, like their food production methods.
Okay.
The technologies they develop to interact with their surroundings.
Right. So like, you know, farming tools, the kind of shelter they build.
Exactly. Yeah, things like that.
That makes sense.
Then you got the social environment.
Okay. The social environment, so how people organize themselves.
Exactly. So there are political systems,
Okay.
family structures, kinship relationships, laws.
Right. The plan for how individuals in a society interact.
Exactly.
Structure their communities.
Yeah, you could even think about how decisions are made,
Right.
like in a family unit versus how they're made in a national government.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
Both part of that social environment.
That's a good distinction. Yeah.
And then finally, you have the ideational environment.
Okay. The ideational environment. So that's where we get into the realm of ideas.
Yes, beliefs,
Beliefs,
values, worldviews.
worldview.
Things like knowledge systems, artistic expression, magic, scientific understanding, philosophical viewpoints, and religion.
Wow. That's a lot.
It's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
essentially how a culture makes sense of the world.
Okay.
Assigns meaning,
Right.
defines what's important.
So like a culture's understanding of what constitutes beauty or
Exactly.
what is considered ethical behavior
Yeah.
that would fall into this category.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So when we talk about different cultures, what Liz Batak is saying is that they're essentially different strategies,
Okay.
different solutions that societies have developed over time to address these three fundamental aspects of life.
Right. So not that one is superior to the other.
No,
They're just different.
it's not about one being better than the other. They're just different plans shaped by different histories.
Environments.
And environments, exactly. You can
Yeah.
think of it like different architectural blueprints
Oh, yeah.
to build a functional building,
Right.
but each blueprint has its own unique style,
Yeah.
materials suited to a particular location and purpose.
I like that analogy a lot.
Yeah, it's helpful.
Yeah.
So to kind of bring this back to communication
Okay.
and why this is so important,
Yeah.
Hesselgrave uses the experiences of missionaries
Okay.
working in diverse cultural contexts as a case study to illustrate just how vital understanding these different designs for living is
Right. Makes sense.
for effective communication.
Yeah, because they're going to different cultures all the time.
Right, exactly. And you might assume that for missionaries, the biggest challenge is the distance.
Right. Traveling to a new country,
Yeah, learning a new language.
having to learn a new language.
Yeah. But Hesselgrave shares how seasoned missionaries often say that the most significant hurdle they encounter is in what they call the last few feet.
The last few feet. What do they mean by that?
Yeah, it's the actual moment of trying to communicate effectively with individuals from a culture that has different assumptions and values and different ways of understanding the world.
So they could get the language down,
They could get the language down.
but still have trouble connecting.
Exactly. It's that final crucial step of connecting meaningfully.
Oh, wow. That is a striking image, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, somebody might spend years studying academically, travel thousands of miles, master a new language to a certain degree, and yet still find themselves facing immense difficulty conveying even seemingly simple concepts or building genuine rapport with the people they've come to serve.
Exactly.
Really highlights that language fluency alone isn't enough.
No, it's not enough. And, Hesselgrave really emphasizes the frustration.
Yeah.
This can lead to...
Right, because they're trying to do good.
Right. These are individuals who are deeply committed to their message.
Yeah.
It's something that has profoundly shaped their lives, their understanding of the world, and they want to share it.
Yeah.
They want to articulate it clearly.
Of course.
But they discover that simply knowing the content of their message isn't sufficient. It's the way they communicate it.
Right.
That's just as, if not more important.
It's like that old saying, it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Exactly. Yeah. And this really underscores a fundamental principle of communication.
What's that?
It's not just about the information you transmit. It's about whether that information is accurately received.
Right.
And understood.
And understood, yeah.
By the other person.
Which can be tough.
Yes. It's very difficult. And to achieve that understanding across cultural boundaries, you absolutely have to understand your audience.
You have to know your audience, yeah.
And Hesselgrave points out missionaries need to prioritize learning before they can teach.
Oh, I like it.
And listening before they can speak.
That's good.
They need to immerse themselves in the worldview of the people they're trying to reach.
Right.
In order to have any hope of their message resonating.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it's like, think about trying to explain a joke that relies heavily on a specific cultural reference to someone who's never encountered that reference.
Right. They're not going to get it.
It just falls flat.
It's going to go right over their head.
Exactly. So to help us understand this further, Hesselgrave discusses Eugene Nida's three-culture model.
Okay, the three-culture model.
Yeah, so this was developed specifically to analyze cross-cultural communication, particularly in the context of missions.
Okay.
But the underlying principles are relevant to any communication across different ways of life.
Oh, that makes sense.
So Nita suggests that a missionary, or really any cross-cultural communicator, operates at the intersection of three distinct cultural spheres.
Three cultural spheres.
Yeah, so first there's what he calls Bible culture.
Bible culture, interesting.
Yeah, the original cultural context in which the biblical message was first given.
Okay.
So think about the society of ancient Judah during the time of the Old Testament prophets.
Right.
The cultural norms of Jerusalem during Jesus' ministry.
Yeah.
Or the Hellenistic influences in Athens when Paul was preaching.
Okay, yeah.
Each of these settings had its own unique language.
Of course.
Social customs,
Right.
legal systems, ways of understanding the world.
So when we talk about the culture of the Bible,
Yeah.
we're referring to the social customs,
Yeah.
the beliefs,
Yeah.
the historical context.
It's not just about the theological content.
Right.
It's about the everyday world of the people involved.
The world that they lived in, yeah.
Exactly. So the first crucial task
Okay.
for anyone trying to communicate a message rooted in the Bible
Right.
is to decode the biblical text.
Decode the biblical text.
Yeah, and this involves going back to the original languages,
Okay.
Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek,
Right.
and making a real effort to understand the message within its original cultural framework.
So it's not just about finding an equivalent word
No.
in another language.
It's about grasping the cultural nuances,
Yeah.
the implicit understandings that would have been obvious
Yeah.
to the original audience.
That makes sense.
And what's fascinating here is how easily our own modern Western cultural assumptions can lead to misinterpretations.
Oh, yeah.
Hesselgrave shares a really interesting example about a tour group visiting the Holy Land.
Okay.
And they were informed that John the Baptist's diet included locusts.
Locusts.
Yeah. Now, for most people in a Western context,
Yeah.
the image that comes to mind is grasshoppers.
That's right. Grasshoppers, yeah.
But the tour guide explained that in the Jordan Valley during that time period,
Okay.
the term locusts could have referred to a type of locust fruit.
Locust fruit. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's a sweet pod-like food source.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it's just the simple example that highlights how our own cultural lens
Yeah.
can unintentionally shape our understanding,
Right.
even when we're trying to interpret historical texts.
We bring our own baggage.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
We project our own cultural realities onto situations from vastly different times and places.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So then the second cultural sphere
Okay, the second cultural sphere,
in Nita's model is the missionary's culture.
the missionary's culture.
So the culture in which the missionary was raised,
Right.
educated,
Yeah.
and within which they first encountered and understood
Mm-hmm.
the Christian message.
So their own background
Exactly.
shapes their perspective.
Yeah, their communication style,
Understanding of the world, yeah.
everything. And then the third culture is the respondent culture,
Your respondent culture, okay.
the specific culture to which the missionary is sent.
Right, the target audience.
Exactly. And this culture has its own unique language,
Of course.
established communication norms, its own sources of authority and information,
Right.
and its own worldview.
Which may be very different from the previous two.
Exactly. And this is where the second crucial task comes
Okay.
in. The process of encoding the message,
Including
in this case, the biblical message,
Right.
in a way that will be understandable, meaningful,
Mhm.
and resonate appropriately within the respondent culture.
So taking into account all those factors.
Exactly. And the key here is to minimize the cultural baggage.
The cultural baggage.
Yeah, those unintended influences and interpretations
Right.
stemming from the missionary's own culture.
So it's not about, making it fit your own understanding.
No, it's about understanding their understanding.
Right. Meeting them where they're at.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And finding those culturally relevant ways to express the core message
Yes.
so that it connects.
That's important.
Yes, it is. And Hesselgrave gives this really compelling example.
Okay. I like examples.
I know you do with the translation of Revelation 3.20.
Revelation 3.2.
Yeah, for the Zanaki people in Africa.
Okay, the Zanaki.
Yeah, so the verse says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock."
Okay, I've heard that verse.
Yeah, but in Zanaki culture,
Oh.
the act of knocking on a door
Yeah.
carries a very specific connotation.
Oh, really? What's that?
It's something a thief does.
A thief.
Yeah. To see if anyone's home before breaking in.
Oh, wow. So the opposite of what
Yeah.
the verse is trying to say.
Completely. And, so imagine
Yeah.
trying to convey an image of Jesus seeking peaceful entry
Right.
by using an action that signifies a threat.
Right. Total misunderstanding.
Yeah, so the translators had to move away from
Yeah.
a literal translation of knock
Yeah.
and instead use the phrase, "Behold, I stand at the door and call."
And call.
Yeah, because in their culture, a respectful person
Right.
wanting to enter a home would call out the name of the person inside.
Oh, so they identify themselves first.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so it might sound slightly different to
Right.
our Western ears,
Yeah.
but the core message remains the same.
It does.
And it's communicated in a way that makes sense
Right.
for the Zanaki people.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example of why cross-cultural communication demands that we go beyond just a word-for-word translation
Right.
and really consider the cultural connotation.
Yeah, the deeper meaning.
Yeah, and interpretations of language and action.
That's so important.
It is. And Hesselgrave also emphasizes that the ultimate goal of cross-cultural communication
Yeah.
shouldn't just be achieving understanding.
Okay.
It should be to empower individuals within the respondent culture
Right.
to become effective communicators themselves
Okay.
within their own cultural context,
I see.
using their own language and idioms.
So not just imposing our own way of doing things on them.
Exactly. And he raises this really important point
Okay.
about the danger of encouraging national leaders or new believers
Right.
to simply adopt Western ways.
Right. Western ways of thinking, teaching, doing things.
Exactly. And he gives an example of an Asian pastor
Okay.
who, after receiving training in cross-cultural communication,
Right.
realized that for his entire ministry,
Wow.
he had essentially been preaching Western sermons.
Western sermons.
Yeah, not in content necessarily,
Right.
but in style,
Oh.
structure,
Yeah.
the underlying cultural assumptions.
Oh, wow.
Simply because that was the model he was exposed to.
Right. He didn't know any other way.
Yeah, and so this raises the question, if we're not mindful of these dynamics,
Yeah.
we can inadvertently create a dependency
Right.
on external ways of thinking and communicating,
Yeah.
rather than nurturing and empowering indigenous leadership.
Right. Encouraging their own style.
Exactly. And Hesselgrave also points out another challenge,
Okay. What's that?
the development of a limited global vision.
Limited global vision.
Yeah, so because a missionary's focus
Yeah.
is often so intensely directed towards their specific target culture,
Yeah.
they might not effectively communicate a broader sense of concern and connection with other peoples and cultures.
The new community they're working with.
Exactly.
I see. So they have blinders on in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this can lead to a situation where, say, Christians in one country
Okay.
might have very little awareness of the needs and experiences of those in other countries with different cultural backgrounds.
So it's important to broaden that vision.
Exactly. It really underscores the importance of fostering a truly global perspective.
Yeah. A global perspective.
Within any community.
Within any community.
Our understanding of the world shouldn't be limited to our immediate sphere of influence.
To just our little bubble.
Exactly. So as we kind of wrap up here,
Yeah.
the central message is this.
Okay.
Whether we're bridging vast continental divides
Right.
or just interacting with someone from a different background in our own society.
Right next door neighbor.
Yeah, someone from a different generation.
Different socioeconomic group.
A different socioeconomic group, or even just someone with different life experiences.
Yeah.
Effective communication really hinges on our ability to understand and respect different cultural contexts.
I think you're absolutely right.
And what's really fascinating is that these cultural barriers,
Yeah.
while often invisible,
Right.
exert a profound influence
Yeah.
on how our messages are received and understood.
They really do.
Yeah, the process of overcoming these barriers is complex,
It is.
ongoing,
Yeah.
requires empathy,
It does.
careful observation, a willingness to learn,
Yeah.
and a constant awareness of our own biases.
Our own biases. Yeah.
Yeah, and, in our increasingly diverse and interconnected world, cultivating this kind of cultural awareness and developing strong cross-cultural communication skills.
That's so important.
Isn't just a nice thing to have.
Right.
It's becoming absolutely essential.
Yeah. For navigating our personal and professional lives.
Exactly.
And so for you, the listener,
Yeah.
think back to a time when you tried to communicate something really important to someone who came from a significantly different background than your own.
Yeah.
Whether that difference was cultural in the traditional sense or rooted in socioeconomic factors, age, or even just very different life experiences.
Yeah.
What specific cultural factors, in Luz Betok's terms,
Right.
the physical, social, or ideational aspects of their design for living
Right.
might have been at play in that interaction?
That's a great question.
And how might a deeper understanding of those factors have shifted the dynamic or even changed the outcome?
That's something worth thinking about.
Food for thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Yeah, this was a good one.